Texas at Oklahoma. Marco, what should bettors be looking at?
They got to decide if Texas is as bad as they looked last week against UCLA, or did they just get caught looking ahead to the Red River shootout?
Okay, so what you're saying is if Texas is really good, we should back Texas. And if Texas isn't really good, we should back Oklahoma.
That's what we've got to figure out in this podcast.
All right, so I'm asking you, though, we don't like to waste time. What should bettors be looking at?
Well, last week's Texas game, I think, was a combination. One, of them looking ahead to the Oklahoma game, and two, the score itself was misleading. Texas had 5 turnovers in that ball game. UCLA benefited from all of those turnovers and made the score look a lot worse than that game was. Granted, Texas did have some problems defensively that surprised me because UCLA has not been that good this year.
Now, something I mentioned when I was on my weekly Friday spot with ESPN Los Angeles is that UCLA's loss against Stanford that was a blowout early in the year doesn't look quite so bad. The Stanford team is really for real, and we'll be talking about them in a couple updates from now or a couple videos from now. I mean, is this UCLA team that bad? I mean, Texas should be able to. It's one thing, like you said, to maybe lose the game because of a few extra turnovers, but it seemed like they were blown out. Is your take away from this game, even assuming a little bit of lack of motivation, is that Texas, that the UCLA game isn't very telling?
It's definitely a problem. We saw some chinks in the Texas armor last week.
How would you define those?
Well, defensively, they had problems stopping the run last week. They've got to fix that. But on the flip side, we're focusing solely on Texas. Oklahoma was a team that was life and death last week themselves with the Cincinnati team that we saw the week before look absolutely horrible on Thursday night against NC State.
All right, so let's question this whole Oklahoma, because as I dug into the Oklahoma side, it made me really question that this team is it seems like right now, and it's a subtle point, is OU. I think what most people are saying, OU's not that good, and Texas isn't that good, and both are a little bit overrated. Now here's an interesting stat: is OU has outscored their opponents in the first 3 quarters, so quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, 126-12. Now think about that, 126-12. In the final in the fourth quarter, they've been outscored 41-10. And it seems like in most of the situations, it's been a late charge by the team that's a pretty big underdog, racking up a lot of yards, and people were saying things like I'm going to say now, OU's giving up 420 yards a game. But when you're 126-12, when the game's competitive, now the question becomes how much of it is these elite Oklahoma players just losing interest?
Well, I hear what you're saying, and that's interesting, breaking it down by the quarters. But Oklahoma's 4-0. 3 of the 4 wins have been by a grand total of 12 points. So how dominating have they been?
Well, 126-12 in the first 3 quarters. Clearly there's not one right answer. If you say, to me, that is the key point of this game. If you say Oklahoma is really the team that beat these teams 126-12, and the fourth quarter was them getting, lackadaisical, all of a sudden, now, if Oklahoma if the fourth quarter was 0-0 in all their games, if there was no fourth quarter scoring, right now we'd be saying Oklahoma is one of the best teams in the country. They've outscored their opponents 126-12. The fact that the fourth quarter scoring has been 41-10 is what makes us think this team's overrated, and they've yet to play anyone. The question is, the whole game seems to swing on which of those is true.
Well, both teams, yeah. Who is the better team here? I'm going to lean to the Texas side, and I'm going to go back and make an emphasis that I think the UCLA game last week was more of a look-ahead spot, and the reason I'm going to say that is this was a classic sandwich situation for Texas. What's lost in the shuffle was prior to playing UCLA, which, as we said, on paper hasn't looked that good this year, but now going back and looking at what Stanford's done and then what UCLA did to Texas, maybe, it was an overreaction to how bad UCLA played the Stanford game. but Texas played Texas Tech the week before. That's a rivalry game, a conference game, rivalry state of Texas.
Understood.
Played UCLA last week and then have Oklahoma this week. If you're going to look past one of those three teams, it's obviously going to be UCLA in that scenario.
All right, so before you give your prediction or projection on this game, let me give you one stat that backs up your Texas and one stat that I think doesn't, or one fact that doesn't. The last 7 times Texas has had a double-digit home loss, which is rare for this Texas team. They're 7-0 ATS after a double-digit home loss. So this is a proud team, and I think it's a combination of, if you've ever been to Texas, you understand that UT is a religion down there. Right. They get blown out at home. They redouble, they re-triple their effort, it would seem. And it's also probably a combination of that with the overreaction from the public, which we always get, which we may get and have gotten in this game. Number 2, though, and I think this really favors Oklahoma, is Texas started out 9 out of 9 passing against UCLA for 51 yards. So that's like 6 yards a completed pass. They're dinking and dunking. And one thing, I got a scout, or not a scout, but a guy here in Vegas that bets the Big 12 really hard. And what he tells you about Bob Stoops' defenses is that if you are one-dimensional, he'll kill you. The way that they press the corners, not to get too tactical, is if you're not able to both run and pass vertically, they smother you. And this Texas team with a new quarterback, I don't think they're going to be able to go vertical. They didn't go vertical against UCLA, which gives Oklahoma, to me, favors them significantly. But why don't you give us your prediction?
I'm going to go ahead and say last week, was just a fluke with Texas. I'm going to give them the rebound this week. I'm going to take Texas to pull them out, upset. 24-21 is the way I have the game, going with Texas on top.
All right. Now, one other point. If you do like Texas, this stat is very interesting. 10 of the last 12 Oklahoma-Texas games have been decided by double digits. All right, so why is that? I think it's very well why playoff games oftentimes in the NFL are blowouts. Is the game is so important. In the playoffs, it's the end of the season. Here, it's the biggest game of the year for these teams. Is once a team gets down by a significant margin, if it's 14 or whatever, and they feel like they're out of the game, there's such an emotional letdown that it seems like that team piles on. And you get that in the NFL playoffs when there's an extreme score and it just keeps going and going. You get that here. Clearly, these are 2 really good teams. To say 10 of the 12 games have been double digits. So probably taking the 3.5 or the 4 with Texas isn't necessary. And again, you never know. But statistically, it seems unlikely that's going to matter. So I would say, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, if you do like Texas, play the money line.
It's a way to go, but I'm old school. I like to grab my points and stay with the 3.5 there.
All right, now it's your turn to continue the conversation in the comment section with me and Marco. And next up, we're going to be talking Florida at Alabama.